Several months ago, when I asked Congressman James Clyburn, the third-ranking Democrat in the House, to tell me where in the Constitution the federal government is authorized to regulate everyone's health care, he replied that most of what Congress does is not authorized by the Constitution, but they do it anyway. And there you have it. It's unbelievable. But Congress recognizes no limits on its power. It doesn't care about the Constitution. It doesn't care about your inalienable rights. It doesn't care about your liberties protected by the Bill of Rights. It doesn't even read the laws it writes. Any dismissal of the Constitution by anyone in government is cause for great concern. The very first thing that everyone in government does is to swear to uphold the Constitution. However, the congressman, I'm talking about Congressman Clyburn, and now this Congressman Hare, they both follow a long tradition of lying and avoiding and evading the Constitution. I've written 5 books on this very subject. It is sad and troubling that those in government spend more time evading and avoiding the Constitution rather than upholding it. Joining me now to discuss all this is Thomas Woods, the author of 9 books, including the New York Times bestseller Meltdown, a free market look at why the stock market collapsed, the economy tanked, and government bailouts will make things worse. Tom is also the author of one of the standard books on our loss of freedom, Who Killed the Constitution? Tom, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.
You are not surprised any more than I am, any more, I would suspect, than the good people watching us now, that yet another congressman has acknowledged publicly, although to the face of those who disagreed with him, that he doesn't care about the Constitution. So if everybody from a public school janitor to the President of the United States cannot start their job until they take an oath to uphold the Constitution, what are we to expect?
Well, you're right about that, Judge. And I don't know whether to laugh or cry, but I'll point out that what I hear a lot. I mean, I actually think, in some ways, at least the guy is being honest. Whereas what we'll sometimes get are, I think, rationales that are worse than just admitting, okay, we're not following the Constitution, because you will get things like, well, there are clauses in the Constitution that allow this. The General Welfare Clause says the federal government can do anything it wants to on behalf of the general welfare. I mean, kids are taught that. I mean, kids actually think that's true.
Right. Now, I'm glad you raised that. Not only are kids taught that, Tom, but Democratic leadership teaches it to the Democrats in the House, because you and I have both heard members of Congress say the General Welfare Clause. And I'm not just picking on the Democrats, because the Republicans did this as well when they were pushing legislation. But let's talk about the General Welfare Clause. It is a clause of limitation. It, as I understand the history and even the way big government Supreme Courts have interpreted, basically says you can't write a law that's just for the benefit of Tom Woods or just for the benefit of Nancy Pelosi. The law has to theoretically make its benefits available to everyone. If it doesn't, it's not a valid law. This has nothing to do with general or welfare.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is that when the federal government engages in exercising the powers delegated to it, it has to exercise those powers in a way that redounds to the welfare of the whole country, not just one particular area, one particular person, whatever. It has to be for the whole country. That's what it means. What it's being taken to mean by people who I just have to be dishonest. It's very hard to imagine this is just just a misunderstanding. Is that it means that the federal government can legislate on behalf of whatever it thinks will be for our own good. And when we look at what people like James Madison said about it, they made this very clear. They said, if that's what the General Welfare Clause meant, then there was no point in listing the federal government's powers, because apparently it has the power to do anything it thinks is for our good.
In one of his recent dissents, Justice Clarence Thomas, who's been fairly faithful to constraining the Congress into the confines of written by the Constitution, said, could the Congress regulate a Tupperware party? Well, under some of the Supreme Court opinions, and certainly under the opinion of this Congressman Hare, we're going to let you hear him in just a second, the Congress could regulate the Tupperware party. Here's this congressman, Tom, from just outside Chicago. He's being confronted by his constituents who don't agree with his having voted for health care. Listen to what he says about whether or not he even cares about the Constitution.
Well, look, we've got to turn this.
More doctors. We're going
Where in the Constitution?
No, we are going to. I don't worry about the Constitution on this, to be honest.
I don't worry about the Constitution on this, to be honest. Now, he may be a very big-hearted and generous guy, but let him be big-hearted and generous with his own money. Maybe he should be in some city council where they can affect the welfare of people in certain bad neighborhoods. He simply doesn't have the authority under the Constitution to do what he wants to do.
No, absolutely. Thomas Jefferson, this guy is not. It was Jefferson who said that, let us hear no more of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Yeah, Thomas Jefferson was worried about the Constitution. He's a model of a statesman. You should be worried about it. And in fact, that's the reason you have a written Constitution. You don't have a written Constitution to spell out how often you vote for president and how the Electoral College is going to work. You can do that without a written Constitution. Great Britain has done that for centuries without a written Constitution. The only reason you have a written Constitution is to limit power. And if a congressman like this says he doesn't care what the Constitution has to say, then as far as he's concerned, there may as well not even be one.
All right, I want to talk to you about eminent domain, something that Jefferson argued and Barry Goldwater argued and our friend and colleague Congressman Ron Paul has argued the government shouldn't have the power to do. This is when the government comes in and takes usually real estate, but actually it could be anything, from you against your will, pays you the fair market value of it, and is supposed to use it for the public good. But we have a little twist happening on this in the state of Utah. Utah, as you may know, Tom, recently enacted legislation, and usually eminent domain doesn't require legislation. Usually a governor or a mayor can do it on his own. But Utah enacted legislation which would have the state of Utah seize real estate owned by the federal government and pay them the fair market value of it, and have a Utah judge sign a deed deeding the property back to Utah. What do you think about that?
Well, I love the spirit in which they're trying. You know, you got to give them an E for effort here. It seems to me the federal government would bring to bear every resource at its disposal to prevent this from happening. But the fact is that we are heading so fast, I mean, faster than we ever imagined, toward a condition of bankruptcy that ultimately the federal government is going to have to start selling off a lot of these properties anyway, so they may as well get used to it.
You know, for 100 years, the federal government subsisted on excise taxes and user fees and sale of federal land. And someone said to me the other day, well, that couldn't happen. If you were to look at the United States of America, at a map of the United States of America and how much of the real estate is owned by the federal government, fully half of it is. In the state of Utah, between 80 and 85% of the dirt of the earth is owned by the federal government. And the vast majority of that is not being put to any use. It just sits there. I agree with you. I think the state of Utah will lose, but it will generate a great public debate on the role of the states in our system and on the power of the overweening federal government over the states, and we need that debate.
Absolutely. And so even if something like this doesn't quite work out, as you say, Judge, it's extremely important that these issues be raised, and particularly by a non-Southern state, so that we can show once and for all that what this is all about is the freedom of all Americans, and you cannot try to smear it by associating with the Confederacy. Everybody wants basically to have some voice in how he's governed, and there's a lot better chance that you'll get your voice heard in Boise or Santa Fe than you will in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm expecting the state of Utah to enact legislation that will make it illegal for the federal government to come into Utah and force people to buy health insurance. That will again create another confrontation between the state and the federal government and generate yet again another debate that we should have. And who knows, there may be some Thomas Jefferson on a federal district court somewhere that we don't know about who'll rule the right way on this stuff.
You never know. He's been laying low, waiting for just this moment, Judge. This is his time to pop his head up.
Tom Woods, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Judge.